Have you ever wondered what your life might be missing? Not the things money can buy, the luxury cars, penthouse views, or designer wardrobes, but the connections that give those things meaning. This is the story of a man who had everything society told him to want, but nothing his heart truly needed. Until one autumn day in a forgotten corner of a park, when a chance encounter with a little girl building a cardboard home would shatter everything he thought he knew about success, responsibility, and love. Some moments change us forever. This was his. The late afternoon sun filtered through the amber leaves of San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, casting long shadows across winding paths lined with trees preparing for winter's embrace. Jackson Reed adjusted his Italian silk tie and checked his Patek Philippe watch. 4:37 p.m. Another high-stakes meeting concluded, another multi-million-dollar deal closed. At 43, he stood at the pinnacle of success, his name synonymous with luxury real estate developments that transformed city skylines and reshaped neighborhoods. Reed Properties adorned buildings that punctuated the San Francisco skyline like exclamation points of achievement. His phone buzzed incessantly, 17 unread messages in the past hour alone. Executives waiting for decisions that would affect hundreds of employees. Partners seeking approvals for design changes that would cost millions. Assistants confirming appointments with investors who controlled billions. With a controlled sigh that betrayed only the slightest hint of exhaustion, Jackson silenced the device and slipped it into the pocket of his tailored Armani suit. These solitary walks had become his only escape from the relentless pace of empire building. 60 minutes of carefully scheduled decompression before returning to the machine of his making. The crisp autumn air carried whispers of approaching winter, but Jackson barely noticed the beauty surrounding him. His mind still buzzed with the boardroom's electricity, calculating leverage points for his next acquisition, anticipating his competitors' responses, visualizing his next victory. Success had become his only companion in the decade since. His marriage dissolved, a casualty of his ambition that he had long rationalized as inevitable collateral damage. "You will never know what you're missing," his ex-wife Catherine had told him on that final day. Her voice not angry but filled with a sadness that occasionally still echoed in his dreams during rare moments of stillness. "You've built an empire of glass and steel, but there's no heart beating inside it." He had dismissed her words then with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to sweeping inconvenient emotions aside. What could he possibly be missing? His penthouse on the 47th floor overlooked the entire bay, the Golden Gate Bridge framed perfectly through floor-to-ceiling windows. His garage housed 4 vehicles worth more than most people's homes. His calendar was filled with meetings with the city's most influential figures, politicians, tech visionaries, cultural icons, all eager for a moment of Jackson Reed's valuable time. And yet each evening, he returned to perfectly designed rooms where the only greeting was the soft click of automated lights responding to his presence. His footsteps echoed against imported marble, the sound bouncing off walls adorned with carefully selected artwork he rarely truly saw anymore. Sometimes, in moments of unexpected honesty just before sleep claimed him, Jackson acknowledged the emptiness that all his success couldn't seem to fill, a void that expanded as his empire grew. "Mr. Reed," his executive assistant had said just that morning, "Forbes wants to include you in their 40 under 45 feature. They're calling you the architect of modern luxury." He had nodded, acknowledging another accolade with the same detached appreciation he might give a satisfactory financial report. Recognition had lost its savor, becoming merely another metric of progress. As Jackson rounded a bend in the path, something unusual caught his eye. Beneath a sprawling oak tree, partially hidden from the main walkway by a cluster of rhododendrons, a small figure was meticulously arranging cardboard boxes. Curious, he paused, watching as tiny hands carefully constructed what appeared to be a makeshift shelter. It was a young girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old. Her clothes were clean but visibly worn, jeans with a patched knee, a blue sweater, slightly too large for her frame, sneakers showing signs of careful preservation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, revealing a face of striking intelligence. What arrested Jackson's attention, however, were her eyes. focused and determined, yet carrying a shadow of sadness that seemed far too heavy for her years. They reminded him of something, or someone, he couldn't quite place. She worked, with methodical precision, trying to stabilize a roof made from a flattened box, her frustration visible as it collapsed for what appeared to be the third or fourth time. Something about her deliberate movements, her solitary presence in the park as daylight began to fade, made Jackson stop completely. He glanced around, expecting to see parents nearby, perhaps a family enjoying a late picnic, or a mother watching from a bench while making a phone call. But the surrounding area was empty save for a few distant joggers and a dog walker on the main path. A strange feeling tugged at him, something unfamiliar that pulled him from his carefully planned route. Before he could analyze the impulse, before his rational mind could intervene with warnings about engagement with strangers, he found himself walking toward her. "That's quite the engineering project you've got there," he said, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. The girl looked up, wariness immediately replacing concentration. Her eyes, an unusual shade of amber brown with flecks of gold catching the slanting sunlight, assessed him with a caution that seemed practiced and necessary. "The corners need reinforcement," she replied after a moment, her voice soft but clear, with a vocabulary that suggested an education at odds with her current activity. "If you overlap them like this," she demonstrated with small, deft fingers, "then the walls hold better against the wind." Jackson nodded, genuinely impressed by her practical thinking. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to a bench nearby, still maintaining a respectful distance. She shrugged, neither welcoming nor dismissing him, a peculiar maturity in her caution that spoke of lessons learned early. As he sat, Jackson realized how long it had been since he'd had a conversation that wasn't about business, acquisitions, or market values. "I'm Jackson," he offered, deliberately omitting his last name and title, identifiers that usually opened doors and commanded deference, creating encounters rather than connections. "I'm Mia," she replied, returning to her work but keeping him in her peripheral vision, the instinctive vigilance of someone who had learned to protect herself. The name struck a pleasant chord in Jackson's mind, though he couldn't place why. "That's a beautiful name." "My mom picked it," she said simply and continued working, her small fingers creasing cardboard with practiced precision. "She has good taste," Jackson commented, watching as Mia tried a different configuration for her roof support. "She says it means wished-for child," Mia added after a moment, a flicker of something, pride, perhaps, or longing, crossing her face before disappearing behind the mask of concentration. Jackson felt an unexpected tightness in his chest at her words. "That's lovely," he managed, surprised by the effect her simple statement had on him. When was the last time anyone had shared something genuinely meaningful with him? Not data, not projections, not strategic information, but something personal, something of value beyond numbers. "Do you need help?" he asked, nodding toward the collapsing roof structure. Mia considered him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she weighed his offer against some internal metric of trust. "Do you know about architecture?" she finally asked, her tone serious. Despite himself, Jackson felt a smile, a real one, not the practiced expression he deployed in boardrooms, tug at his lips. "As a matter of fact, I do." "Okay then," she decided, sliding a piece of cardboard toward him. "You can hold this part while I fix the corner." As Jackson knelt beside the cardboard structure, designer trousers meeting damp earth without concern, he realized he was having his first authentic human interaction in what felt like years, and with a child of all people. A child building a house out of discarded boxes in a public park as the day's light began to fade. He should be concerned, he knew. He should be finding a park ranger or calling social services. And yet something held him there, following Mia's precise instructions on how to hold the cardboard just so, watching her small face light with satisfaction as the roof finally held. Success without connection leaves a void that no achievement can fill. True wealth cannot be measured in possessions or titles, but in meaningful human bonds. But sometimes, Fate places us exactly where we need to be, in the path of someone who will challenge everything we thought we knew about ourselves and the world we've so carefully constructed. Are you feeling the weight of this story already? Take a moment to reflect. What in your life might you be overlooking while chasing society's definition of success? What connections have you sacrificed at the altar of achievement? Share your thoughts in the comments below. You might be surprised how many others are facing the same questions. As the minutes passed, Jackson found himself oddly reluctant to continue his walk. There was something about Mia, a quiet dignity, an independence that seemed both admirable and deeply concerning in someone so young. She worked with the focused determination he recognized in himself, yet applied to surviving rather than accumulating. "You're pretty good at building," he commented, watching as she used a found stone to weight down a corner of her now stable roof. "I've had practice," she replied, the simple statement carrying implications that made Jackson's brow furrow. No child should need practice at building shelter. The shadows were growing longer now, the park gradually emptying as evening approached. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and Jackson saw Mia suppress a shiver as she continued her work, pulling her too large sweater more tightly around herself. "It's getting late," Jackson observed carefully, glancing at his watch. Nearly 6, the time he'd normally be heading back to his office for evening calls with East Asian investors. "Why don't you go home?" Mia's hands stilled for a moment, her eyes fixed on the cardboard wall before her. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, almost rehearsed. "My mom said if we get lost, we can just wait in the park." The practiced casualness in her response rang false, and something cold settled in Jackson's chest. He chose his next words with care, the same precision he used in delicate negotiations. "And where's your mom now, Mia?" She shrugged, the gesture too deliberate to be genuine. "She's been away for a while." "Away where?" "Just away." Mia's tone closed the subject firmly, but her fingers nervously traced patterns on the cardboard, belying her attempted nonchalance. Jackson shifted, uncomfortable with the growing certainty that something was very wrong with this situation. "How long is a while, Mia?" She looked up at the canopy of leaves above them as if searching for answers there among the amber and gold. 3 months, I think. Maybe longer now." Her voice carried the uncertainty of someone who had been keeping track of days without the structure of normal routine. The statement hung in the air between them, stark and alarming. Jackson leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice gentle despite his rising concern. "Who's taking care of you?" Mia lifted her chin slightly, pride evident in her posture. "I take care of myself. I'm good at it." Jackson noted her clear speech, her relatively clean if worn clothing. Someone had raised this child well, taught her manners and resilience and self-respect. And yet here she was, alone in a park as darkness approached, building shelters from discarded boxes. "You seem very capable," he acknowledged, respecting her dignity. "But everyone needs help sometimes, even adults." He hesitated, then added, "Even me." She looked at him skeptically, taking in his expensive suit and the subtle signifiers of wealth he carried. "You don't look like you need help." "Appearances can be deceiving," Jackson replied, surprised by his own candor. "Where do you sleep, Mia?" Her eyes darted away, the first sign of genuine discomfort she'd shown. "Different places. I move around." She gestured to her cardboard construction. "Sometimes here, when it's not raining. I'm making this better, for when it gets colder." Jackson felt something twist inside him, an unfamiliar ache that had nothing to do with business concerns or market fluctuations. Here was a child preparing to brave San Francisco winters in a cardboard box, speaking about it with the matter-of-factness of discussing homework or piano practice. "And where do you go when it rains?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's an overpass," she said, then quickly added, "But I stay away from the people there. I hide in a small space where nobody can see me." The simplicity with which she described her survival strategy, a child's strategy for navigating a world no child should have to face alone, made Jackson's throat tighten. This girl, this Mia with her intelligent eyes and careful hands, had been sleeping under overpasses while he complained about thread counts in his penthouse. "What about your father?" he asked carefully. "Is he around?" Mia shook her head. "I don't have one." She said it simply without self-pity, a statement of fact rather than a complaint. "Everyone has a father, Mia. Not me." She turned back to her shelter, adjusting a corner with unnecessary focus. "It's just been me and Mom." "Always," Jackson pressed gently. "Always," she confirmed. "Mom said, some men just aren't ready to be fathers." She glanced up at him briefly. She wasn't mad about it. She said people have to make their own choices. Jackson felt an uncomfortable resonance with her words. How many times had he justified his own choices with similar reasoning? People have to make their own choices. Business requires sacrifice. Success demands focus. "And what's your mom's name?" Jackson asked, hoping to gather information that might help him get this child to proper authorities, though something in him recoiled at the thought of simply handing her over to a system that had already failed her once. "Clara," Mia answered, a softness entering her voice that had been absent before. "Her name is Clara Adams." Jackson felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Clara. A name he hadn't allowed himself to think about for years. A name from before his marriage, before his greatest successes, before he'd fully embraced the ruthless focus that had built his empire. Clara Adams, with her artist's hands and infectious laugh. Clara who painted landscapes that captured not just places, but feelings. Clara who had called him Jack despite his protestations that it wasn't professional enough. Clara who had walked away from their relationship, or had he been the one to walk? Memory was a treacherous thing, rewriting itself to protect the ego. "Clara," he repeated, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Mia looked at him curiously, her head tilting slightly. "Did you know her?" Jackson hesitated, trying to organize his suddenly scattered thoughts. "I knew someone named Clara once, a long time ago." "Was she nice?" Mia asked, genuine curiosity breaking through her guarded expression for the first time. Jackson felt a smile, real and unguarded, cross his face for the first time in what felt like years. "Yes, she was very nice, kind and funny, creative." The memories surfaced like bubbles from the deep. Clara's laugh, her passion for art, her stubbornness when she believed in something, the way she'd challenge him to see beyond profit margins, to the human impact of his work. "That sounds like my mom," Mia said quietly, a flash of pain crossing her features before she masked it again behind practiced stoicism. Jackson's mind was racing now, connecting dots he hadn't even realized existed. Clara Adams. The timing, 11 years ago, that spring and summer before his first major development deal. But it couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet, "Mia, do you have a picture of your mom?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice casual. She shook her head, genuine regret flickering across her face. "Not anymore. I had one in my backpack, but somebody took it when I was sleeping at the bus station." Her matter-of-fact acceptance of such a profound loss, not just possessions but her only image of her mother, squeezed something in Jackson's chest painfully. Instead, Mia reached into her pocket and pulled out something that gleamed in the fading light, a small item she clearly treasured given the care with which she handled it. "But I have this, it was my mom's. She gave it to me before she..." Her voice faltered for a moment. "Before she went away." She held out her palm, and nestled, there was a silver necklace with a small heart-shaped pendant. Jackson felt his breath catch as she turned it over, revealing an engraving he knew existed before he even saw it. Clara J. The world around Jackson seemed to recede, park sounds fading to a distant hum. He knew that necklace. Had selected it himself from a display case at Tiffany's, had it engraved himself, gifted it himself. In 2013, when Clara had finally convinced him to celebrate Valentine's Day despite his protests about commercial holidays and manufactured sentiment. Their relationship had been intense but brief, a whirlwind romance that had begun at a charity gala, and ended when his career demanded more of his attention than he could balance with a personal life. Clara had understood, or so he'd told himself. A clean break was better than a slow, painful decline of missed dates and broken promises. Better to end things before real damage was done, or at least that's what he'd convinced himself as he'd walked away, focusing on the Embarcadero development that would become his first major success. He hadn't returned her last 3 calls. His assistant had eventually been instructed to say he was unavailable. "Mia," he asked, his voice barely audible over the sudden pounding of his heart. "When is your birthday?" "January 15th, she replied, looking confused at the change in subject. January. Nearly 9 months after he'd ended things with Clara in April 2013. The math was undeniable, inescapable, damning. "And how old are you?" 10, she answered, eyes narrowing slightly as she sensed the tension radiating from him. "Almost 11. Jackson stared at the child before him, truly stared, taking in every feature with new awareness. Her amber brown eyes that had seemed so strikingly familiar from the first moment. The determined set of her jaw when concentrating. The analytical intelligence in her gaze. Features he saw in his own mirror every morning, softened and blended with Clara's gentle beauty. It wasn't possible. And yet as he looked at Mia, at his daughter, he knew with sickening certainty that it was not only possible, but true. A memory surfaced, painful and clear. Clara's voice on his voicemail. The last message he'd never returned. "Jack, please, I really need to talk to you, it's important." And then, when he hadn't called back, "I guess I have my answer then. Goodbye, Jack." Had she known, even then? Had she tried to tell him? Had she needed him, and he had been too busy building his empire to notice? As these thoughts crashed through him, Mia continued working on her shelter, unaware of the revelation unfolding beside her. She added a small door made from a folded piece of cardboard, explaining, "This way I can close it when it's cold." The practicality of her statement, this child, his child, planning how to survive winter nights alone, hit Jackson with physical force. What had he done? What had his choices cost? The past we walk away from doesn't disappear. It continues without us, creating ripples and consequences we may one day have to face. But nothing could prepare Jackson for what was about to come. The moment when Mia's innocent words would shatter the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart and force him to confront the full measure of his absence. What would you do if you discovered a life-changing truth that had been hidden from you for years? This story reminds us how quickly our priorities can shift when faced with what truly matters. Keep watching to see how Jackson's life transforms in ways he never could have imagined. Jackson sat frozen on the park bench, the weight of realization crushing down on him like a physical force. Every moment with Clara flashed through his mind. The laughter, the dreams shared, the future hinted at, but never fully discussed. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about her art. The gentle way she'd tease him about his workaholic tendencies. And then the clean, efficient break he'd orchestrated when his first major development deal had demanded his complete focus. "I need to prioritize," he'd told her. "This opportunity won't come again." "Neither will this," she'd replied quietly, gesturing between them. But he'd been too focused on the future to hear the truth in her words. Had she known when he walked away? Had she tried to tell him? Had she faced pregnancy and childbirth and 10 years of parenthood alone because of his ambition? Questions hammered at him, each one more devastating than the last. Across from him, Mia watched his reaction with growing confusion and alarm. "Are you okay?" she asked, taking a cautious step back. "You look weird." Jackson fought to compose himself, to find words that wouldn't terrify this child who might be, who almost certainly was, his daughter. "I'm fine," he managed, though nothing about him felt fine. "It's just, that necklace surprised me." Mia's hand closed protectively around the pendant. "It's mine. Mom said to keep it safe." "I believe you," Jackson assured her quickly. "It's very special." It's the only thing I have from her, Mia said quietly, the words landing like blows. The social worker said I couldn't go back to our apartment, so I couldn't get our pictures or Mom's painting stuff or anything. He drew a deep breath, steadying himself against the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. With careful deliberation, he spoke the words that might forever change both their lives. Mia, how old did you say you are? 10, she repeated, brow furrowing at the repeated question. I turn 11 in January. And Jackson swallowed hard, forcing himself to ask what he already knew. Who is your father? The change in Mia was immediate and profound. Her shoulders tensed, her expression closed, and she took another step back as if preparing to run. A child who had learned that certain questions led to danger or disappointment. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. My mother said, my father is very important, but he doesn't know I exist. The word struck Jackson with physical force. He doesn't know I exist. 10 years. For 10 years, this child had been in the world. His child. And he had never known. Had Clara chosen not to tell him after his callous dismissal? Had she tried and failed to reach him? Had his assistant screened her calls, deeming them unimportant to a man rising rapidly through the ranks of San Francisco's elite developers? Did she? Jackson struggled to keep his voice even. Did she ever talk about him? About why he wasn't there? Mia's face clouded, a mixture of confusion and long-held hurt visible in her expression. She said he had to go away for his work, that it was very important to him. Her voice dropped even lower. More important than us. Each word was a knife, precisely placed. Jackson felt them cut through the carefully constructed narrative of his life, the story in which his success had been earned through sacrifice and dedication, not through abandonment and neglect. She wasn't mad, Mia continued as if defending Clara's honor. She always said it was his choice and she respected it. She said he was building important things. Building important things. The irony was unbearable. What had he built that could possibly be more important than this child before him? What tower, what development, what profit margin could justify his absence from her life? I asked about him once, Mia continued, seemingly unable to stop now that the dam had broken. Last year, when the kids at school were making Father's Day cards, Mom just said that sometimes people have to make choices, and his choice was his work. So you've never met him? Jackson asked, the words painful in his throat. Mia shook her head. Mom had a picture, but she kept it in her special box. I wasn't supposed to look in there. She hesitated, then admitted in a lower voice. I did once. He was tall, he looked serious. Jackson thought he had known pain in his life. The sting of rejection from early investors, the pressure of near bankruptcy during the recession, the collapse of his marriage. But nothing had prepared him for this. The simple, devastating account of his absence from the lips of the child he had never known. Do you ever wonder about him? He asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. Mia was quiet for a long moment, considering. Sometimes, she finally admitted. Not so much what he's like, but what? She looked down at her hands, suddenly seeming much younger than her 10 years. But why he didn't want us? Jackson felt physically ill. I'm sure that's not, he began, not knowing how to finish the sentence without revealing too much. It's okay, Mia interrupted with that preternatural maturity. Mom said it wasn't about me, that he made his choice before he knew about me. And do you believe that? Jackson asked, his voice hoarse. Mia's silence was answer enough. Mia, he began, not knowing what he could possibly say to make this right, but knowing he had to try. But before he could continue, Mia's next words stopped him cold. I'm sorry, she said, her voice small but clear, her eyes downcast. If I'm the reason you're not happy. The world seemed to stop spinning. Jackson stared at the child before him, at his daughter, and saw with horrifying clarity what his absence had created. A little girl who believed she was the reason her father had walked away, who had internalized abandonment as somehow her fault, who was apologizing for her very existence. Something broke open inside Jackson then, a wall he'd built years ago, brick by brick to protect himself from the messy, uncontrollable nature of emotions and attachments. In its collapse came a flood of feeling so overwhelming he could barely breathe through it. Guilt, shame, grief, and underneath it all, a fierce, protective love he had never experienced before. "No," he said, the word raw and urgent. "No, Mia. You could never be the reason for anyone's unhappiness, never." She looked up at him, confusion in her eyes, not understanding the depths from which his words emerged. "You don't know that." "I do know that," he insisted, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Any child is a gift, a blessing, never a burden." "Then, why do some fathers leave?" she asked, the simple question piercing straight through him. "Because they make mistakes," Jackson answered, the words inadequate, but true. Terrible mistakes they don't understand until it's too late. Mia studied him, those intelligent eyes seeming to see more than he wanted to reveal. "How do you know?" Jackson struggled for words that could bridge the chasm between them, between the man who had walked away and the child who had borne the consequences. "Because," he said finally, each word weighted with a truth he was only now fully comprehending, "any father would be blessed to have a daughter like you." Mia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, hope, wariness, passing through them. "You don't even know me," she pointed out pragmatically. "I'd like to," Jackson replied, with a certainty that surprised even him. "If you'd let me." She studied him with those alarmingly perceptive eyes, her eyes, his eyes, searching for something. Why? It was the moment of truth, literally and figuratively. Jackson could manufacture some excuse, get her to authorities, wash his hands of a situation he hadn't created but was unquestionably responsible for. Or he could step into the responsibility he hadn't known was his. But that had been waiting for him all these years. "Because I think," he began, heart hammering against his ribs, "I think I might be the J in that necklace." Mia went very still, her fingers instinctively closing around the pendant. "That's not funny," she said, her voice tight with sudden anger. "I'm not trying to be funny," Jackson replied gently. "The J stands for Jackson. I knew your mother, Clara, 11 years ago. We were together for several months." "You're lying," Mia said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Her eyes searched his face with new intensity, looking for traces of herself. "The necklace," Jackson continued quietly. "I bought it for her on Valentine's Day 2013. She thought the holiday was important. I thought it was commercial, but I got her the necklace anyway. Had it engraved at Tiffany's on Union Square." Mia's hand trembled slightly around the pendant. "If you're my father," she said, the word father catching in her throat. "Why weren't you there? Why didn't you help my mom when she got sick? Why didn't you come find me?" Each question hit like a physical blow. "I didn't know," Jackson answered, the inadequacy of those 3 words almost unbearable. "I didn't know about you, Mia. Your mother and we broke up before she knew she was pregnant. At least I think that's what happened." He ran a hand over his face. "I should have returned her calls. I should have." "You didn't want us," Mia concluded, her voice flat. "I didn't know to want you," Jackson corrected, the distinction crucial. "But now that I've met you." His voice caught unexpectedly. "Now that I've met you, I can't imagine not knowing you." "You're just saying that," Mia replied, but a hint of uncertainty had entered her voice. "I'm not," Jackson insisted. "Mia, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "I have your eyes," he said softly, "or you have mine. Same color, same shape." Despite herself, Mia leaned forward slightly, studying his face with new interest. "Mom always said I had my father's eyes," she admitted quietly. "And his stubborn chin," Jackson added with a gentle smile, recognizing the determined set of her jaw as his own. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, father and daughter, separated by a decade of absence but connected by undeniable biology. Then Mia's expression hardened again. "If you're really my dad," she said, skepticism evident to prove it. "That's fair," Jackson acknowledged. "We can take a test, a DNA test. It will tell us for sure." "What's that?" "It's a medical test that can prove if people are related," he explained. "If I'm your father, the test will show it." Mia considered. This, her analytical mind visibly working through the implications. "And if it says you are?" It was the question Jackson had been asking himself since the moment he'd seen the necklace. What then? What responsibility did he bear? What changes would he need to make? How could he possibly atone for 10 years of absence? "If I'm your father," he said slowly, "then I want to help you. Find your mother. Make sure you're safe. He hesitated, the word foreign yet necessary. "Be your dad." "You can't just decide to be a dad," Mia said, the wisdom in her words far beyond her years. "You have to earn it." "You're right," Jackson agreed, humbled by her clarity. "But I'd like the chance to try." Our choices create ripples that extend far beyond our awareness, affecting lives we may not even know exist. True responsibility means facing the consequences of our actions, even those we never intended. But recognition is only the first step. Now Jackson faced the greatest challenge of his life, rebuilding what was broken and finding Clara before it was too late. We all make choices that have consequences we can't foresee. What choice in your life had the most unexpected impact? What would you do if given a second chance to make things right? This story is about to take a powerful turn as Jackson confronts the reality of what his absence has cost. Stay with us. The next hours passed in a blur of activity, decisions, and revelations. Once the initial shock had subsided, Jackson's executive instincts took over, the ability to act decisively in crisis, serving him now in a context far more personal than business. He called his attorney, Gerald Winters, who had guided him through countless complex negotiations and legal challenges. But this request was unlike any other. "I need an emergency DNA test, tonight, and I need to secure temporary custody of a minor who may be my biological child," Jackson explained, pacing beside a food cart where he'd bought Mia hot chocolate and a sandwich, her first proper meal, he realized with a pang, in who knew how long. "Jackson, these things take time," Gerald cautioned. "There are procedures, waiting periods." "Make it happen," Jackson interrupted, with the same tone that had closed billion-dollar deals. "Whatever it costs, whatever favors need calling in." "This isn't negotiable, Gerald." Through channels his influence made accessible even after business hours, Jackson arranged for an expedited DNA test at a private medical facility. Throughout the process, Mia watched him with a mixture of wariness and curiosity, answering his gentle questions about her life with Clara, their small apartment in the Mission District, and how they had been separated. "There was an accident," she explained as they sat in a private room at the lab, waiting for the expedited DNA results. A nurse had already taken cheek swabs from both of them, Mia following the procedure with the serious focus she seemed to bring to everything. Mom was walking home from work. A car went through a red light. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers twisted the hem of her jacket. "They took her to the hospital. I waited, but she didn't wake up." "And no one came for you?" Jackson asked, horror mounting at the thought of this child alone in a hospital waiting room. Mia shrugged, the gesture heart-wrenchingly adult. "The social worker lady came. She said I needed to go to a special home while they found my family, but I don't have family except Mom." Her chin lifted slightly. "So I left. I went back to our apartment, but after a while, the landlord changed the locks." "What about school?" Jackson asked, trying to understand how she had slipped through the cracks of every system meant to protect children. "I went for a while," Mia replied. "But then they started asking questions about why Mom never came to meetings. The teacher called someone from the city." She looked down. "That's when I stopped going." Jackson fought to keep his expression neutral, though inside he was raging at a system that had failed this child so completely. He thought of all the taxes he paid, the charitable donations he made to community organizations, the ribbon cuttings he'd attended for civic projects, none of which had managed to create a safety net strong enough to catch one vulnerable child. Which hospital, Mia? Do you remember where they took your mother? San Francisco General, she replied promptly. I tried to go back there, but they wouldn't let me see her without a grown-up. When the test results confirmed what Jackson already knew in his heart, a 99.9% probability of paternity, he made 2 calls. One to his executive assistant, canceling all appointments for the foreseeable future with no explanation beyond family emergency. The second to his driver, directing him to San Francisco General Hospital. But the test says you are my dad, Mia said quietly as they walked to the waiting car, her voice carefully neutral, giving away nothing of what she felt about this confirmation. Yes, Jackson replied, equally careful. Is that okay with you? She considered this with the same serious deliberation she'd shown toward her cardboard engineering project. I don't know yet, she finally answered. I need to think about it. Her honesty startled a laugh from him, so like himself in her direct approach. That's fair, he agreed. You can take all the time you need. In the sleek interior of his company car, Mia fell asleep within minutes, exhaustion finally claiming her now that immediate survival was no longer her sole responsibility. Jackson watched her, this small person who carried his DNA, his features, his responsibility, and felt a protective instinct so fierce it nearly took his breath away. How had he built skyscrapers and reshaped city blocks and never known this feeling? How had he accumulated wealth beyond most people's imagination and missed this most fundamental human connection? At the hospital, his name and a substantial donation smoothed their path to information. Clara Adams had indeed been admitted 3 months earlier following a pedestrian vehicle accident. She had sustained severe head trauma and had been in a coma since then, with no identified next of kin. We've maintained basic care, the attending physician explained, reviewing Clara's chart with the weary efficiency of someone managing too many patients with too few resources, but without insurance or family advocating for her. He left the implication hanging. I'm her family, Jackson stated firmly, and her daughter's father. He gestured to Mia, who had awakened and now stood, close beside him, her face a mask of controlled hope. What does she need? Sir, with all due respect, what does she need? Jackson repeated, each word precise. The doctor sighed, recognizing the immovable force before him. She needs specialized neurological care, advanced imaging, possibly experimental treatments, none of which is covered by the hospital's charity care program. She'll have it, Jackson said simply. All of it, starting immediately. Standing in the doorway of her hospital room moments later, Jackson felt the final pieces of his old life falling away. Clara lay, still and pale against white sheets, tubes, and monitors surrounding her like sentinels. Her vibrant spirit, the laughter that had once filled his apartment, the passionate debates about art and architecture, the gentle teasing about his workaholic tendencies, all of it trapped behind closed eyelids. She was thinner than he, remembered, her cheekbones more prominent, her hands showing signs of hard work he'd never seen during their time together. The artist's hands had clearly known labor since they'd parted. Is she going to wake up? Mia asked quietly, pressed against his side, her usual independence momentarily forgotten in the face of seeing her mother for the first time in months. The doctor had been non-committal, speaking of prolonged unconsciousness and uncertain prognosis in the careful terms of someone who had delivered too many broken promises. I don't know, Jackson answered honestly, finding he couldn't offer this child platitudes. But we're going to be here either way. Promise? Mia asked, looking up at him with a vulnerability that made his chest ache. Promise, he replied, the word carrying a weight unlike any contract he'd ever signed. The next weeks transformed Jackson Reed in ways no business success ever had. He moved into a hotel suite near the hospital, ensuring Mia had stability and comfort while he navigated the complex legal process of establishing paternity rights and finding the best care for Clara. He hired the best neurological specialists in the country to review Clara's case, implemented experimental treatments his wealth made accessible, and spent hours by her bedside, speaking to her about their daughter, about the years he had missed, about his profound regret for walking away. "I didn't know," he would tell her quietly when Mia was at school or asleep. "But that's no excuse. I should have returned your calls. I should have checked on you. I'm so sorry, Clara." Sometimes he imagined he saw her eyelids flutter in response, though the doctors warned him against false hope. During those long hospital vigils, he learned to be a father. He listened to Mia's stories about life with Clara, their small but happy apartment, her mother's artwork that decorated their walls, the Saturday morning pancake tradition. He helped with homework once he'd enrolled her in a nearby school, surprising himself with his patience for explaining fractions and grammar rules. Most importantly, he discovered the pure joy of hearing her laugh, really laugh, for the first time when he attempted to make pancakes in their hotel kitchenette and failed spectacularly, setting off the smoke alarm and requiring an embarrassed explanation to hotel security. "Moms were better," Mia had said between giggles. And instead of feeling criticized, Jackson had felt included in a family history he was only beginning to discover. His phone still buzzed with business emergencies, his calendar still filled with urgent meeting requests, but for the first time in his career, Jackson let them wait. His board members were bewildered, his competitors circling like sharks sensing weakness, but none of it seemed to matter compared to being there when Mia needed help with her science project, or wanted to share a drawing of what she called their temporary family, herself, Jackson, and Clara, the latter depicted awake and smiling. "It's going to happen," Mia said confidently when she showed him the drawing. "I can feel it." On a crisp December morning, as Jackson sat beside Clara's bed reading financial reports while Mia worked on a school project nearby, a small sound interrupted the rhythmic beeping of monitors. He looked up to see Clara's fingers twitching slightly against the sheet. "Mia," he said quietly, not wanting to create false hope, but unable to contain the surge of it within himself. "I think you should come here." They watched together, barely, breathing as Clara's eyelids fluttered once, twice, and then slowly opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, drifting across the ceiling before settling on the two faces hovering above her. Recognition dawned slowly in her eyes, confusion, disbelief, and then a spark of awareness as she looked from Jackson to Mia and back again. "Dad," Mia whispered, clutching his hand with a fierceness that matched the emotion swelling in his chest. It was the first time she had called him that, the word as fragile and precious as blown glass. "She's waking up." Clara's lips moved, though no sound emerged. Jackson pressed the call button for the medical team, but his eyes never left Clara's face. After 10 years of absence and 3 months of vigil, he was finally seeing the eyes of the woman who had given birth to his child, the woman he had walked away from when ambition called louder than love. "We're here," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of us. You're not alone anymore." A tear slipped from the corner of Clara's eye, tracking slowly down her temple and into her hair. Whether from emotion or simply physical response, it felt like benediction. True transformation comes not from success or status, but from accepting responsibility and choosing to be present for those who need us most. As Clara began her journey back to consciousness, Jackson faced the final reckoning, the truth of what he had missed and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. What relationships have you neglected while chasing other goals? It's never too late to rebuild what matters most. The conclusion of this powerful story is just ahead, and it might just change how you think about success forever. Spring came to San Francisco, bringing with it renewal in more ways than one. In a sunlit rehabilitation center overlooking the bay, Clara Adams took careful steps along a garden path, her movements still hesitant but growing stronger each day. Beside her walked Mia, chattering about her science project and the new friends she'd made at school, her hand occasionally reaching out to steady her mother when needed. "And then Sophia invited me to her birthday party next weekend," Mia was saying. her animation a world away from the guarded child Jackson had met in the park 6 months earlier. "It's a sleepover with 5 other girls. Can I go?" "We'll see," Clara replied, her voice still carrying the slight rasp that remained from months of intubation. "Let's talk about it with your father." Jackson watched them from a nearby bench, still sometimes unable to believe the turns his life had taken since that autumn day. Clara's recovery had been arduous, relearning speech, movement, and memory in painful, frustrating increments. But her determination was unwavering, especially where Mia was concerned. Clara had woken to a reality that must have seemed like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare at first. Her daughter, who she must have feared, was lost to the system, or worse, safe and thriving. And the man who had walked away from her 11 years ago, now sitting vigil by her hospital bed claiming paternity and responsibility. Their reunion had been complicated. When Clara had fully regained consciousness and understanding, her first reaction to Jackson's presence had been anger and protective fear. The years of single motherhood, of struggling to provide Mia with stability while he accumulated wealth and accolades, had left wounds that simple apologies couldn't heal. "You don't get to walk back in after 10 years and play hero," she had told him during one painful conversation, her voice still weak, but her spirit undiminished. "Mia isn't a project you can acquire when it suits you." "I know," he had acknowledged, accepting her anger as his due. "I'm not trying to take over, Clara. I'm trying to make things right as much as that's possible." "Why now?" she had asked, the simple question laying bare the asymmetry of their experiences, her decade of motherhood against his months of newfound fatherhood. "Because now I know what I didn't know then," he had answered simply. "And I can't unknow it. I can't walk away again." For Mia's sake, they had found a way forward. First as cautious co-parents, establishing boundaries and expectations. Then as hesitant friends, rediscovering the connection that had drawn them together years before. And now as something neither of them had yet defined but both approached. With careful hope, a family of sorts, unconventional but real. Jackson had sold his penthouse overlooking the bay, moving instead to a modest house in a family neighborhood near Mia's new school. The floor-to-ceiling windows and imported marble countertops had been replaced by a backyard with a tire swing, and a kitchen where pancake disasters had become a Saturday tradition. His company still operated, but under restructured leadership that allowed him to be home for dinner each night, to attend school performances, to build the daily rhythms of family life he had never valued until now. "You're staring again," Clara said as she and Mia reached his bench. Her voice still carried that slight rasp, but her eyes held the same directness that had first captivated him 12 years earlier. "Just appreciating the view," he replied with a smile, not bothering to deny it. "Gross," Mia declared with the dramatic flair of approaching adolescence. "You guys are so weird." But the pleased smile she tried to hide suggested she didn't find their growing closeness as objectionable as she pretended. She spotted a butterfly and darted off to follow its path through the garden, leaving the adults in a moment of rare privacy. Clara eased herself onto the bench beside him, her movement still carrying the careful deliberation of someone reacquainting themselves with their own body. The doctors called her recovery remarkable. Jackson called it miraculous. The truth was somewhere in between, the result of cutting-edge medical care, Clara's indomitable will, and perhaps something less tangible that Mia simply called love medicine. "The neurologist says I might be able to return to work part-time next month," Clara said, her fingers absently touching the silver heart pendant that once again hung around her neck, restored and repaired by the same jeweler who had engraved it more than a decade earlier. "That's wonderful," Jackson said sincerely, knowing how important her independence was to her. "Though the foundation position is still yours if you want it." He had established the Clara Adams Arts Foundation during her recovery, funding arts education in under-resourced schools across the city. It was both atonement and opportunity, a way to honor Clara's passion for art while creating something meaningful from their shared experience. She shook her head, smiling. "I need to make my own way. You know that." He did know, and respected it, though the protective instinct that had awakened in him with Mia now extended to Clara as well. Learning to balance that protection with respect for her autonomy was a daily practice, one that required more emotional intelligence than any business negotiation ever had. "The parent-teacher conference is tomorrow," Clara said after a comfortable silence. "Are you still able to come?" "Wouldn't miss it," Jackson assured her, meaning it completely. It still amazed him how completely his priorities had shifted, how meeting rooms that once seemed vital now paled in importance beside school cafeterias and doctors' offices. How quarterly reports that had once consumed his attention now took a back seat to Mia's report cards. How the most important negotiations in his life now involved bedtimes and screen time, rather than million-dollar deals. As they watched Mia exploring the garden, Clara's hand found his on the bench between them, a small gesture that spoke volumes about the journey they'd traveled. "I never thought we'd be here," she admitted softly. "When I found out I was pregnant, after you left, I was so angry. I convinced myself you wouldn't want to know that we were better off without you." Jackson nodded, accepting the truth in her words without defensiveness. "You weren't wrong about who I was then," he acknowledged. "I wouldn't have been ready. I might have provided financially, but—" He shook his head. "I wouldn't have understood what I was missing." "And now?" Clara asked, her eyes searching his. "Now, I can't imagine missing another day," he said simply, "of either of your lives." 2 weeks later, Jackson stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, facing an audience of business leaders and aspiring entrepreneurs gathered for the annual Innovation Summit. His keynote speech had been planned for months, meant to outline his strategies for market domination and wealth accumulation. Instead, as he looked out at the sea of eager faces, people following the same path he had walked for decades, Jackson set aside his prepared remarks. "Success has a cost," he began, his voice measured and clear in the hushed room. "We just don't always know what we're paying until the bill comes due." He told them about a park bench and a cardboard house, about a silver necklace in a hospital room, about a little girl who had believed her existence was the reason for someone else's unhappiness. "I want to tell you about 2 versions of success," he continued. "The first is the one most of us in this room have been pursuing. It's measured in square footage and stock prices, in Forbes profiles and acquisition records." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the audience. "I achieved that kind of success. By 40, I had more wealth than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. By 43, I had an empire that spanned the West Coast." Jackson took a sip of water, then continued. "But there was another measure of success I knew nothing about. It was unfolding in a small apartment in the Mission District, where a woman named Clara Adams was raising our daughter alone, teaching her kindness and resilience and the value of art. Building not an empire, but a human being." From the front row, Mia watched him with those perceptive eyes. Her mother beside her, their hands linked. Jackson smiled at them, no longer the practiced smile of his corporate headshots, but the genuine expression of a man who had found his way home. "I built skyscrapers," he said, his voice thickening with emotion. "While my daughter slept in parks, I closed billion-dollar deals while her mother fought for her life alone. I accumulated more wealth than most people can imagine, but almost lost the one thing I couldn't buy: my family." The room was utterly silent, hundreds of ambitious professionals confronting a story that cut through corporate platitudes to something essentially human. "If I hadn't stopped at the park that day," he concluded, his voice no longer the polished instrument of persuasion, but raw with authentic feeling, "I would have continued building an empire of empty rooms. I would have died wealthy and accomplished and utterly alone." He gripped the podium, leaning forward slightly to emphasize his final words. "Success isn't measured in square footage or stock prices or deals closed. It's measured in moments we're present for, in lives we touch, in love we give that asks nothing in return, in the legacy of how we've treated the people who needed us most." As he stepped away from the podium, the applause was thunderous, but Jackson barely heard it. He was already moving toward what mattered most, the 2 people waiting for him, at the edge of the stage, ready to go home. Later that evening, as they walked along the marina green, Mia ran ahead to the water's edge, while Jackson and Clara followed at a slower pace. "You know," Clara said, watching their daughter with a mother's vigilant eye, "when I first woke up in that hospital room and saw you sitting there, I thought I was hallucinating." Jackson chuckled. "I'm sure I was the last person you expected to see." "It wasn't just that," Clara replied thoughtfully. "It was the way you were looking at Mia, like you'd discovered something precious you never knew existed." "That's exactly what happened," Jackson admitted. "I discovered that all the success I'd been chasing was worthless compared to what I'd walked away from." Clara was quiet for a moment, then said, "I should have told you about the pregnancy." "Why didn't you?" he asked, the question that had lingered between them for months. She sighed, looking out at the bay where the setting sun painted the water, copper and gold. "Pride at first, hurt, then later. It was easier to believe you had chosen your career knowing what you were giving up. The truth, that you never knew you had a daughter, that was harder somehow." "I would have helped," Jackson said, needing her to know this much at least. "Whatever else I would have provided for you both." "I know that now," Clara acknowledged. "But we needed more than financial support, Jack. We needed you. And I didn't think you were capable of that then." The honesty stung, but Jackson couldn't deny its truth. "I wasn't," he admitted. "I had to lose you both to understand what mattered." Ahead of them, Mia had found a perfect skipping stone and was trying to make it dance across the gentle waves. She turned and waved excitedly, calling for them to watch. Her next attempt. "Dad, Mom, look how far I can get it to go. Dad." The word still felt new each time she said it, a gift he hadn't earned but was determined to deserve. "We're watching," Clara called back, then turned to Jackson with a smile that held forgiveness for the past and hope for the future. "We got a second chance, didn't we?" "We did," he agreed, taking her hand as they walked toward their daughter. "And I'm never walking away again." True wealth isn't measured in possessions or achievements, but in the connections we nurture and the love we give freely. It's never too late to choose what truly matters. This story reminds us that it's never too late to choose what truly matters, to rebuild what's broken, to become the person your family needs you to be. If this message resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share with someone who might need this reminder today. Your support helps us continue bringing stories that heal and inspire. Remember, the most important things in life aren't things. Don't let your success in society make you a failure in your own family. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, cherish what truly matters.